Hi there, and welcome to this very first episode of Tinker and the Brain. Have you ever wondered how a 3D printer works? Well, in this episode, we're going to learn how. We are all familiar with printers, but in most cases, when we use the word printer, we talk about the normal kind of printers. That we use in everyday lives to print stuff on paper, whether it's a document or a photograph. The art of printing itself dates way back, as most people know. And the guy who made the first movable type style printing press was? Well, you probably guessed wrong. The first man to invent a printing press with movable types was actually a Chinese man called Bi Zheng, somewhere between the years 1041 and 1048 AD. What about Gutenberg then? Well, Gutenberg invented a very improved version of the printing press, pushing it into the modern ages. That was in the year 1450 AD. The inventor and the date of the first computer printer is debated, but in 1953 the company Remington Rand developed a printer that was used on the UNIVAC computer. But in 1976, however, Hewlett-Packard made the very first consumer inkjet printer, the diskette. With a price at over $1,000, it wasn't really a great hit with customers. But what does this got to do with 3D printing? Well, take a modern inkjet printer for example. The inkjet printer works by having one, but often several ink cartridges, and below these cartridges are basically tiny nozzles that spray the ink on the paper that you're printing. This process can be called an additive process. It simply means that you're adding material to something to obtain your end result. In this case, you add the ink to the paper. And this is actually how most consumer 3D printers work as well. A 3D printer often consists of several axes of movements. The printhead of a 3D printer can move in two directions, side to side and back to forwards, where a normal inkjet head only moves from side to side. The magic of the 3D printer is that it has got a third axis. 3D printers has got a surface on which the printhead prints its material. This is often a plastic or a ceramic plate that can move up or down, thus make it possible to print in 3D. But how does it actually work? Well, a 3D printer isn't really that complicated at all. I like to think them as a combination of an inkjet printer and a hot glue gun. Just like a normal inkjet printer, you have a printing head with a heated nozzle attached to it. But instead of ink, you use different kind of plastic materials. The common thing about all plastics are that they melt at a certain temperature. This is what the 3D printer uses to be able to print the plastic material. The plastic material you can use vary depending on what you are printing or what color you like to use. It can be nature-friendly PLA plastics, PET plastics, or even nylon, just to mention a couple. The printing process itself is much like a regular printer. After pressing the print command of your computer, the 3D printer starts to draw the shape of whatever you like to print onto the printing surface. It distributes melted plastics in almost the same way that a normal printer distributes ink onto your paper. The fun stuff starts to happen when the 3D printer is finished with the first layer of distribution. Yes, layers. After the 3D printer has finished printing the first shapes of your object, the plastic on the surface has cooled down and become a solid once again. This is where the magic happens. The 3D printer then simply moves down the surface a fraction of a millimeter and then starts all over again. This is repeated over and over until you start to build up height on your printed object. You can imagine a normal inkjet printer printing the same letters on the same paper on exactly the same place all over again. Then you have a 3D printer, sort of, just with plastics. So, this is basically how a typical 3D printer works. As mentioned before, the process is a so-called additive process, simply meaning that you add the material to get what you want. There are, of course, different types of 3D printers on the market. You have 3D printers in which you start with a block of material and then remove stuff to get what you want. This is called a subtractive process. A CNC machine is a good example of a subtractive process, and I guess you can call them 3D printers as well, in a way. Well, I hope that you have learned a bit on how those magical 3D printers work. And I hope that you enjoyed this little video. So, thank you and good night.